And another piece of that enclosure, which I thought was really clever, and that might have been where that piece that you were just showing us, that cutout came from, is the cool hide that you put on the back. You took that drainage pipe, that corrugated drainage pipe, and almost like glued it to the back wall. And then, can you describe that process for people who have no clue what I'm talking about right now? Because I thought that was genius. Welcome back to the Animals at Home podcast. My name is Dylan Perrin, and thank you so much for tuning in today. Today, I'm speaking with Brad Gerke, who is the creator of Brad's BioActive builds on YouTube. He is a relatively new YouTube channel, and I actually have to thank one of the commenters of maybe a month and a half ago or so who commented on one of the videos. I should have saved your username, so if it was you, then thank you very much for recommending Brad. But they just said, hey, you should check out Brad's BioActive builds. And when I did, it's one of those channels where when you find it, you're like, how is this channel so small? You know, the quality of the videos and the quality of the builds themselves are just, it's incredible, and it's interesting. And even if you're somebody who isn't ever interested in doing DIY projects because you just don't have the time or the experience, you don't want to dabble in that world at all, these videos are still so helpful because there always is an aspect of DIYing no matter what you're doing in the reptile hobby. Even if you have enclosures from a manufacturer, from a company, you're still going to have to DIY something. You're going to have to put branches in. You're going to have to add some lighting and do some ventilation and maybe some fans. And so in this episode, Brad walks us through how he puts together PVC enclosures. We talk about the sealants and the silicones and whatnot he uses. We discuss how he does his foam backgrounds, including some incredible ideas about building hides into those backgrounds using some drainage pipe. He discusses the out of enclosure, this exterior hide box that he built for his blue tree monitor, which I've seen people do before, and I just love the idea. And Brad talks us through how he did that. He has some incredible ideas as far as air ventilation and air flow within the enclosures. We discuss a drip wall and a pond system that he's building, and it's just a really fun episode. Like I said, even if you're someone that's never going to pick up a saw or build your own enclosure, I think there's so much value here as far as enclosure design and understanding and implementing systems that allow you to build natural-looking enclosures and that function in a natural way that allow you, the animal, to express its natural behavior. So if you are looking for more information on this episode, make sure you head to the show notes at animalsathomenetwork.com. If you would like to join us over at Patreon, you can do that at patreon.com/animalsathome. All the support there goes towards funding this podcast, making sure we get to put out essentially weekly episodes now at this point, which is fantastic. You also get to join the Discord server as well if you jump on Patreon. So we do really appreciate all the support there. Thank you so much to Custom Reptile Habitats for sponsoring this episode of the podcast. So if you're somebody who is not willing to or not interested, don't have the time to build your own enclosure, then you can go check out CustomReptileHabitats.com. There's an affiliate link in both the YouTube description and the show notes. And then you can use some of these amazing DIY methods that Brad talks about in this podcast to implement into your enclosure, because I think that would be really helpful. But let's jump into this episode. Enjoy.
Welcome to the GoFundMe for the Ball Python Deep Dive project. This is an episodic docu-series. We want to include all the relevant studies on ball pythons and then weave that into the story, weave that into the journey of discovery for the viewer. But this isn't just a documentary, we're doing real science at the same time. So we're creating an international study on how ball pythons use their enclosures. And then finally, we want to analyse all the interpretations, all the footage of wild animals. Bring it all together, extract the data from studies, look at this holistic viewpoint, and then identify the gaps. And then go out to Ghana ourselves and film those gaps. We want to go to Ghana with a team of professionals and film ball pythons in the wet season. Will there be so much flooding that ball pythons are forced to climb for refuge? Or will they just be moving in their environment? Let's find out. Either way, we'll show what we find. This is something of an order of magnitude that has never been done before. We want to set a new bar and put it right up here. So if you would like to help in any way to make this possible, then please check out the GoFundMe.
Awesome. Well, Brad, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I much appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm very excited. I think I had a comment maybe a couple weeks back or a month back saying, hey, you should check out Brad's BioActive builds. And I hadn't heard of your channel before, and it's still a relatively small channel, which it won't be for long considering the type of work that you do. But I was just starting to go through it. I'm like, I'm almost like shaking my head mad because your channel should be bigger because your videos are amazing and they're just well done. And then I'm shaking my head about how many amazing ideas you have and how thoroughly and well built everything is. And so we're going to get into some of that because I can't wait to talk to you about like the sort of the DIY side. But to start with, have reptiles always been a part of your life, or is this a newer thing for you?
Yeah, and Dylan, thanks for having me on first and foremost. It's a honor and privilege to be able to come out and share some of the things that I'm doing to try and create naturalistic enclosures and try and uh, maybe persuade the hobby in that direction a little bit. But as far as, some of my history and background with reptiles and amphibians, I mean, ever since I can remember. I mean, I remember going down to the lake, going out by the pond, even, running around as a kid, going in the window wells, finding toads and frogs and hunting for snakes. And, instead of going fishing, I would take a fishing line and, tie a hot dog to it, wouldn't put it through a hook, but tie a hot dog to it, throw it in the lake and reel it in slow when we saw a turtle on it and scoop it up with the net. I mean, anything and everything I can do, being outside and catching frogs and all the reptiles and amphibians, I was all for it.
Yeah, that's awesome. And then as far as keeping them as pets, is that something that you did early on as well?
Yeah, I know it's frowned upon today to catch something from the wild, but when you're a kid,
Oh
I
yeah.
would obviously keep a few of them. I remember I live out in the Chicagoland area, but my grandmother, she lived down in Florida. So naturally, I mean, that was a reptiles lover's dream if you're a kid. You go outside and there's, anoles and all types of lizards running around. So, I mean, I would catch those and sneak them on the plane and bring them back. Mind you, I'm in like second and third grade, so I don't know any better and stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and I think my parents had finally kind of caught on to that and like, okay, maybe we should buy him something so he stops catching all these animals from outside. So I remember my first reptile, well, actually amphibians. It was a fire belly toad and a newt. I believe it was a California newt of some sort. But yeah, and back then, reptile amphibian house material wasn't the greatest, and I had a pretty much a fishbowl I started out with, and the pet store told me, yeah, you can go ahead and just keep them in that. And I remember having them in this fishbowl and just thinking to myself, what can we do more? And so I finally got a 20-gallon tank, and instead of hunting reptiles and amphibians outside, now I'm looking for rocks and sticks and all
Mhm.
different types of decor to put in, and just letting my mind run free with the possibilities of it. Yeah.
And what do you currently keep now?
Currently, right now, geez, morning geckos. I have dart frogs, the strawberry blue jeans, Ufaga familia, cobalts, Leucomelis. I also have it's a 2-2-5 gargoyle geckos, so I breed gargoyle geckos. And then I also have 4 eggs right now, and I believe my one's just about ready to lay. I also keep Ambilobi panther chameleon, Varanus acantharus, Ackie monitors, Varanus cummingii, water monitor, and also probably my favorite, the Varanus macraei, the blue tree monitor.
Mhm. Yeah, that's a pretty great collection, and anybody looking at your work can see how beautiful the enclosures that you have are, and we're going to talk about how you build them and some of the DIY stuff. But it sounds like even when you were a kid with the fishbowl and kind of expanding from there, you've always had this concept of naturalistic keeping. And so has that always been a continuous thread through keeping reptiles, is making naturalistic large enclosures, or has that evolved over time as well?
No, yeah, definitely. Now, I remember going to one of the big box pet stores. I believe it was PetSmart as a kid, and they had this. I think it was in the fish section, but it was like this rock structure. It's made out of plastic, and I remember looking at it, going, "Oh man, like that is so detailed and so cool looking." I want to do something like that. And still to this day, I haven't bought it. They still sell it. And I keep telling myself every time, I pass a PetSmart or something that I'm going to go in there and buy it and, just kind of put it as a little display piece, to remind me where my roots had finally, or where they came from. But yeah, I think over time it just had continued to evolve. And I kind of fell out of reptile keeping for a little bit with substance use disorder and drug addiction and stuff like that, and just the nightmares that went with that. It's kind of hard to care for something in those situations. And when I got back into it, one of the first things that I did, once I got sober and got back into reptile keeping, it was a bearded dragon, and this is probably 13, 14 years ago. And I saw a YouTube video about a guy just kind of making fake rock. It's not really the standard practices that you see today, but I kind of took what he did and saw what he was doing and just thought to myself, I can build my own thing, and just run wild with it. I've always kind of had an artistic background, tattoo artist. I would draw pencil and paper and paint and do all that kind of stuff. And, after getting sober for a little bit, I kind of got pulled in a different direction with a career. So that art piece was missing. And that's where it kind of just really accelerated for me with building Naturalistic Enclosures. And, I'm a firm believer that the sky's the limit with anything in life, whether it's reptiles or whether it's pursuing a goal or whatever have you. Make it happen. Have the dream and live out that dream.
Yeah, I think that's very, very well said. And so as far as your, are you a tattoo artist right now, or is your career something different? Because when I watch you do your work, I'm like, you have to be in construction or trades of some sort.
So I did do construction a little bit, probably between the ages of 17 and 23 or so, 23, 24.
Okay.
I guess you can say basic construction: roofing, siding, soffit fascia, gutters, framing, some additions and whatnot. Currently, I'm not a tattoo artist. I kind of put down the tattoo machines, once I became a director of operations for a drug and alcohol treatment center.
Okay.
And that pretty much consumes most of my life with work. So. Right.
Okay. So your job has nothing to do with construction then now. You have a little bit of experience back. That's amazing, because when I watch your work, I think this is somebody that goes to work and builds homes for a living, and then comes home and is able to do it easily. So you just have a knack for building, obviously.
I guess, yeah. I mean, a lot of it besides the actual work that I did in construction, a lot of it's self-taught. A lot of it is just kind of measuring, and I rack my brain around stuff sometimes, and it's where there's a will, there's a way kind of situation.
Yeah. That's what's striking about the projects that I've seen you do, is how well thought everything is. Just like things like fall into place. It just looks like very methodical work, and you've obviously sat down and planned how things are going to come together. And I mean, I know what it's like to do DIY videos, so it's always looks easier once you put the 10 or 12-minute video together. You cut out all the swearing and throwing drills across the room. I mean, I've been there. You're just like, well, I struggled with that piece, but I don't need to show anyone that because of the end product. This is how you would do it. But yeah, it's incredible. So I kind of wanted to start with just the building, like the PVC enclosures that I've seen you build. I think is pretty interesting and unique, and you do see people doing lots of different styles of DIY enclosure, whether it's wood with a frame and whatnot. But the one PVC enclosure I saw I'm not sure if I'd seen anyone do that specifically, where you're just using PVC and screwing it together. So maybe you could kind of just walk us through the basics of. I think that was for your green tree your blue tree monitor enclosure. Maybe you could just walk us through the basics of how you just create the basic PVC enclosure without getting into any of the internal details. We'll get into that later.
Yeah, more or less the shell of it and stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so I mean, for me, it starts with the planning. That's where it has to start. Is it going to fit through a door frame? If it's not going to fit through a door frame, where would I be able to cut it in half and put it back together after I would move it out? Even before drawing out the blueprints for it, I generally will I kind of have a list of species that I want to care for. So I'll get them and I'll put them in a grow tank. and I'll watch and I'll observe them and see what their habits are. Now, granted, you know that a bearded dragon's going to want to bask, and a tree monitor is going to want to climb and all that kind of stuff. But for me, it's where are they going to want to climb? Where are they going to want to be? So with that, once kind of getting an understanding of that, then I'll start drawing out the plans for the actual shell of the enclosure and how big do I want it, how tall, how wide. But putting it together, I mean, it's fairly simple once you get the recipe down in your head. For me, it's, I start with the bottom. Okay, if you're doing like the blue tree monitor, which is right next to me here, it's 2 feet deep and 6 feet wide. So I'll start with the bottom, and then from there, I'll go ahead and do the back panel. I knew that I wanted it at 4 feet high, so I would just match the length of it as well. So 6 foot by 4 foot. And then the top is going to be the same. Where it changes are the side panels. So you butt that to the back panel, you will just remove the thickness of whatever material you're working with. So in this case, it's 1/2 inch PVC. So I just went ahead and reduced a 1/2 inch. So I measured 23.5 deep. And then from there, I usually do the sides first, the corners, so it has something to stay up and support itself with, and just measure down every 6 inches and 1/4 inch over and go ahead and screw it together.
Yeah, because you're just screwing in the sides directly together, basically creating a 90-degree between the two panels and just screwing right through one end into the other. There's no frame or anything holding it together. It's just simply screws.
Correct. Yeah, and I was nervous about that at first. I did a prototype of the monitor enclosure that was not as tall, so it wasn't going to have as much weight. And I'm like, well, you know what? It'll either work or it won't. It's either going to be totally flimsy or it's going to, work out to my advantage. And I was surprised on how structurally sound it was. And of course, putting reinforcements in and stuff like that, it helps. I did think about using PVC cement, but the cure time, and it goes kind of quick. So if you don't work super fast, you're going to miss it fusing together, and now you have a weak seal.
Right.
On the bigger enclosure I have here, I did use a little bit of PVC cement in certain places, like which I think we might talk about a little bit later, the drip wall and stuff like that. Yeah. But yeah, I pretty much just screw it together, and then the inside, I always tell everybody, do your own research when it comes to using silicone. Make sure it's 100% silicone. But I've also found some silicones don't like sticking to PVC as much as other silicones. And, I forget the name of it, but I know it's at Home Depot. I can send you a picture later if you want to see it. But I've noticed kind of like different silicone tests, just put a little bit on the PVC, wait about 24, 48 hours, see which one, sticks the best to it. So I'll silicone the seams. And then after that, after it kind of the upper portion, anything below, I'll use Lexel adhesive because you can paint that. And then I'll use a little bit of drylok over that just to waterproof it a little bit more.
What is the Lexel? I wasn't familiar with that product until I saw you use it in your videos. Is that more like a glue? Like, is it a silicone-based thing, or?
You know what? I'm not exactly sure. I know a couple of PVC enclosure companies have used it.
Okay, it's just like a caulk, basically.
Yeah, it's like a silicone type situation. Yeah.
It seems to work pretty effectively.
Yeah, I'm happy with it. It does take a little bit longer to cure. So I mean, it's like this enclosure here, like you said, a 10, 15-minute video goes pretty quick, but just waiting 2 weeks for that to dry 100% to make sure I'm comfortable that it's, 100% cured before I dry lock it.
Right.
Because I don't want to trap in any kind of gases or anything.
Yeah. And so as far as let's talk a little bit just about the PVC in general. Where do you get the PVC? The thickness you already mentioned is 1/2 inch. Like, is there a specific brand or type of PVC that you go for?
So they have 1/2 inch at least by me. I've had people message me on, YouTube and Instagram asking, where do you get it from? Some states don't sell it. And I wonder if that has to do with temperatures or humidities or something. I don't know. But I just pick it up at Home Depot. It's a cellular PVC. Also, I know like Lowe's and Menards another bigger box hardware stores out by me. They sell it. But what I do tell people that they don't find it in their state at the big box hardware stores, check a sign shop. Some sign shops, they sell it and they know it as PVC foam board.
Okay.
Yeah, and even when I went to Home Depot, I went to like 3 or 4 of them out by me because I was on the hunt for this stuff. And a lot of the people didn't even know what I was talking about until I actually started like looking around, and I found it. It's over in the hardware section, or sorry, the like the plywood section.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I was like, score! I'm getting me some of this.
And it's paintable.
Yeah.
You can paint right over it.
Yeah. Yeah. For exterior use, you're not supposed to use a dark color, but everything's interior. So go ahead and paint it. Now, if I hit it hard enough, will it chip a little bit, paint come off? Maybe, maybe not, you know. I prime it with a PVC primer first, which I found helps it bond a lot better. I did a couple of tests with that just to see what would hold up better. And yeah, definitely with the primer, it goes a long way.
And are there any cons that you found with using PVC in the way, like, because the enclosure, maybe we can just, oh yeah, I guess you already gave the size. It's 6x4, that the blue tree green, or I keep wanting to say green, the blue tree monitor enclosure. So it's pretty big. Has there been any cons of using that material for that large of an enclosure?
I haven't noticed any. I was afraid of the sides here kind of bowing out a little bit. And the way that I did it is I kind of tied everything together. So I have the blue tree monitor enclosure on YouTube, and then I also have how to build a PVC enclosure, wood or PVC, and that kind of goes over how I did this framework here, and just pretty much screwed it to here, and then screwed in the sides. And has it bowed slightly? No, but when I originally put it together, there was already a slight bow in it, only because of how I put the XPS board. But it's not 100% square, but for the most part, I mean, you can't even notice.
Yeah, it's pretty. It comes together pretty easy, and for anybody watching, obviously we're going to direct you towards your videos to really get the full instructional video, but because it comes together very, very nicely. And then the enclosure behind you on your other side is the much larger enclosure. That's an 8 foot, is it by 5 feet tall?
5 foot 10 inches tall.
Okay, it looks like you kind of maximize the height of your basement, basically.
Yeah, I got an inch between the support beam just to be able to slip a Miss King tube and everything under there.
And is that enclosure is not going to get out of your basement, I'm sure. So is that one that you have planned to cut in half if you have to, or?
Yeah. So what I did is everything here I've measured up to where it's 34 inches or so. I forget the exact, but right in the middle is where it splits. So I can go ahead and just rip it right in half and take it out the door frame.
Okay. Hopefully you don't have to do that for a while.
I have no plans on moving. Yeah. No plans on moving anytime soon. I actually asked my wife, "Hey, are we moving anytime soon?" She said, "No, I don't think so." I'm like, "All right, cool." Started drawing it up.
Yeah. That's the thing. As long as you own the house and you're like, then you can kind of go with an enclosure that's too big to get back up the stairs. That's perfectly fine. And so tell us a little bit about that enclosure, because it's much larger. And I have watched the video, but now I'm kind of forgetting, because that one, did you use the same way where you were just screwing the corners together, or was there was framing in that one, I think?
Yeah, I had to frame this one out. It wouldn't have held. That would have been way too flimsy.
Yeah.
Just by screwing it all together. So it's super solid and secure.
And then I know on the YouTube channel you haven't said what's going in there. What's the plans for that one, if you're willing to say?
Yeah, I got to say something for the channel, but we can definitely talk offline, and
okay.
I don't mind telling you there. Yeah.
Okay, so it's a surprise. So it'll come, because you've done the first part for that video, and I cannot wait to see additional parts for that, because it looks like it's going to be an incredible build. And it's obviously huge, and you have this huge foam background that you've already done, and that's what I want to talk to you about next, because I think the way you do the foam background is pretty similar to lots of DIY people. Using the styrofoam, gluing it to the back, and then the nightmare of using the wire brush attached to the drill to sort of, scuff it up and make some more natural formations. But when I heard you talking about it, I swear you said you put 8 coats of drylok on those backgrounds. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, the Varanus macraei, the blue tree monitor, they have, I mean, they're like thorns coming out of their their fingers or their hands and stuff. So I wanted to make sure that it wasn't going to pierce through it. So yeah, I put eight coats of it on there. It was a long process, man.
Oh, I can't imagine how much of a nightmare that is, because I know it's such a not it's not nice to paint, especially when you're using a brush. It just, it's not like it just going on painting a wall. Like, you're constantly having to get into every single crevice and corner that you created. So yeah, that's horrible.
Yeah, and I found the XPS board, like the insulation board, the pink stuff. Um, it does take drylok, or it's so much easier to work with when it comes to using drylok, because like spray foam, I mean, you have to pull off that outer coat,
Yes,
that
yeah.
clear whatever, that kind of the skin, I guess you would call, of the spray foam. And when you pull that off, you get so many pores in the spray foam, and now you got to really get it the drylok in all the little air holes and everything. So the XPS board is a lot easier to work with when it comes to drylok, but still, I mean, it takes some time, and you're right, 100%. I mean, you have to get in every little nook and cranny a few times. So
Yeah, that's commitment. And then when you were doing that, were you using the same color? Like, I know drylok comes in a couple colors, but then you can use the Quikrete dye. Were you just putting the same color over and over just to get to that 8 layer? Or, because I know afterwards you made it look a lot more natural, but what was the process through those 8 layers?
so yeah, good question. I use a different color for every coat.
Okay.
Main reason being is if I do white, the first coat, then the second coat, if I did black or whatever color I make, I'll be able to see exactly where I need to go next. Because you want to make sure you cover the whole thing. If you're doing 8 coats, might as well hit it all. You don't want to, miss a few spots. So the color difference, the different tones, allows you to see exactly where you need to go next, and it goes a little bit quicker that way.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then maybe you could just quickly, for those who aren't familiar with the dry brush method, as far as adding detail and a little bit complexity to the face of the rock afterwards, could you just quickly walk through how you do that successfully?
Yeah, so my last and final coat, I'm going to do it as the darkest tone possible, generally to pretty much as black as I can get. Because what that's going to do, that's going to get inside all the deep crevices and kind of create a shadow look. And then from there, I'll take sometimes, 3 or 4, sometimes 5 different tones, depending on, the look I'm going for. And I'll do, like the darkest tone all the way to the lightest tone. And when your dry brush is essentially just that, you take a paintbrush, a brand new paintbrush is going to be the best. Just get a little bit on the bristles, wipe it off pretty much to where there's nothing even, um, coming off the brush, and work my way to the lightest tones. Um, every tone, when I get lighter, a little bit less on the paintbrush, because you just want to skim the surface, and that's what's going to kind of give it that naturalistic look. It's going to pull it from the rock. It's going to make other spots look a little bit more worn. It's just, honestly, that's probably the simplest part of the whole dry brushing method the whole dry locking method is the dry brush.
And
And it's so cool when it all comes together.
oh yeah, and it is amazing because you think like, if someone's never done that before, you think someone went in there with an intricate brush and had to like add those details. But then when you do it, you realize how quickly that dry brush method really goes on, and it's like, oh, all of a sudden it just looks like this like detailed rock. When you're doing that, are you using just the Quikrete dye, or are you mixing it with drylok as well and putting more drylok on?
Yeah, it's drylok. I usually use like red cups, plastic cups, Dixie cups, and I'll fill it maybe halfway up or 3/4 up of drylok, and then I'll just Quikrete, and they have, I think, 4 or 5 different colors: charcoal, like brown, and then you can even get even more creative and start mixing those together. But yeah,
Yeah.
you mix the Quikrete right into the drylok.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. And with the 8 coats, has the monitor been able to dig through that, or is it staying solid enough where the nails aren't damaging it?
Yeah, so far it's going super strong. I actually have a little piece right here. I mean, you can see this is part of it when I ripped out. Forget what I had to rip out. I ripped out, I think, originally I had some stuff on the side, but I mean, it's right here. I mean, it. It's
That's a
solid.
rock.
And
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And that was another one of those. Okay, we'll see what happens. If it doesn't work, I was going to go ahead and add cement to certain areas. I'm now working with, which I'm sure we might talk about a little bit later, but Zoopoxy, PolyGem Zoopoxy, which is a 2-part epoxy. That's what I'm using for the enclosure behind me here.
Okay.
Um, But yeah, I figured I would use that in here, but I haven't needed to. And I mean, he's getting big, and he runs all over the place, and I haven't noticed one puncture hole yet. So
Yeah, I can see him motoring around behind you, which is like the cool thing
oh,
about
cool.
how well that enclosure is designed is, anybody who keeps monitors knows how difficult they are to make sure they have the appropriate enrichment to prevent them from getting bored and depressed. And this animal behind you is not surfing on the glass. I can just see him coming in and out of the trees and hanging out in the plants on the walls and whatnot. So it's not an animal that's tired of its environment. It looks like it's engaged and sufficiently enriched, which is really cool.
Yeah, yeah, and he's all over the thing a lot of times. And once again, it's that enrichment piece. It's the stimulation. It's the enhancing that naturalistic and the natural behaviors as much as possible, which I get enjoyment out of. He's a more or less a. You're not going to take him out and play with him, right, or hold him all the time. He might come out from time to time when I go ahead and feed him a quail or some, hornworms or crickets on tongs. But for the most part, I mean, he's just to kind of watch and observe and see the beauty of what they are.
Yeah, absolutely. And another piece of that enclosure, which I thought was really clever, and that might have been where that piece that you were just showing us, that cutout came from, is the cool hide that you put on the back. You took that drainage pipe, that corrugated drainage pipe, and almost like glued it to the back wall, and then. So can you describe that process for people who have no clue what I'm talking about right now? Because I thought that was genius.
Yeah. So I mean, I knew that I wanted a hide. I knew that I wanted a couple of different hides. One of them being a cool hide. So I wanted to put it a little bit lower in the cage so it wasn't under any of the basking lights or anything like that. But I still wanted it to where if he was sleeping there at night, I have a DP projector that kicks on. I didn't want it to be too cold, so it's actually right in the center where the DP projector would be. So at least that way it'll bring the temperatures up a little bit for him. But yeah, it's just a drainage pipe and for a gutter. And so what I do with all my fake backgrounds is I'll do kind of a draft or put together, like I will do all the walls before adding any detail or features. That way it's easier to work with. And I'll be able to get a more visual on where I want to put things. So what I did is I just put the gutter drainage pipe right up against the wall, traced it out with a black marker, cut into the drylok with a Dremel tool. And speaking of the strength of the drylok, I mean, there were sparks coming off the stuff. So
wow.
There's little sand granules and stuff like that in it. So and the reason I cut into the background to kind of recess it in was to give the monitor as much space as possible, and also try and make it look as naturalistic as possible. So it goes in. I just spray foamed around it and continued dry brushing again. So
yeah, and the final product is you can't even really see it. Like it's almost like it just blends perfectly into the wall, but it's essentially just a tunnel that's fixed on the wall in a way that it's just, I don't know, it's I've never seen anybody do that. I'm like, oh, like that's what I'm saying at the beginning when I'm shaking my head watching your videos because I'm like, that is such a damn good idea that I should have thought of that. Like you just every time I saw you do something, I'm like, that is so clever. And it's do you notice him using it at all?
He does. He uses it a lot. He'll use it sometimes if he gets spooked. He'll run through there and then he'll pop his head out the other end and then he'll see that it's me. I mean, they're so good with facial recognition. He'll see it's me and then he'll come right out. He does use it. Not as much as I would have thought, but he definitely uses it. I mean, I think it's just one of those things like, oh, cool, I'm going to go in here today,
Yeah, that's cool. I mean, who knows? Like as I've done that before where I've made some feature in my enclosure and been like, oh, I thought this animal would use it, and then I went like a year without them touching it, and then suddenly they become obsessed with this thing. It's as they evolve themselves, they might use the enclosures differently. And one other thing with the backgrounds that I saw you do, and if this was kind of on the same point where you're saying you sort of finish everything, the background, sketching it out, adding all the details that you want. Something that I'd seen you do is you made a shelf out of the Great Stuff foam, which that's not revolutionary, but I don't know how you did that, because when I use Great Stuff foam, like if you're trying to create a protrusion off a wall, like for me it just falls and just it gets like heavy enough where it just completely collapses, and you come back and you have a bunch of Great Stuff foam on the floor of the enclosure. And so is there a trick that you're doing to keep it, because it almost seemed like you just like sprayed it, and as you were spraying it, we're just moving the nozzle further and further off the wall in order to like bring this protrusion off the actual background.
Yeah, one, I've learned not to rush enclosures.
Mm.
When I look at an enclosure, sometimes I can't wait to get this done. And I've really pulled back from that and taking my time with it. The way that I see it is, hey, I'm going to have this. If I build it right, I'm going to have it for a lifetime. So I found that one, spraying the spray foam a little bit slower. One, you don't get as many air bubbles when you go ahead to carve it. So it's more dense and it's a stronger structure. But then also, I mean, really just doing one or two uh, beads, I guess you can say, on top of each other, then waiting for it to cure. About
Okay.
8 minutes after doing that, though, go ahead and spray it with water. That'll help it cure quicker and tighter. It'll stop the foam from expanding, which kind of sounds counterintuitive, like, hey, I want this to expand. I want it to get bigger. But that way it's not going to grow or expand so much to where it gets that weight and then fall in.
Okay.
So, yeah, take your time with it and then wait for it to cure and hit it again and keep building it out to where you want it.
Gotcha. Okay, that makes sense. That makes really, yeah, because that's exactly what happens to me. I try to build stuff out, and then it gets to a point where it balloons itself out so much that it just peels itself right off the wall, and you're just like, damn it, that didn't do anything. So that's the trick. You got to be patient.
Yeah.
And that's actually a good mindset to have with these things, because I definitely get into the mindset of like rushing to try to finish things and like, I've got to get this done. I got 2 hours to work on it. But really, you should have no goal of like, today I'm going to finish this. It should just be, today I'm going to work on the enclosure, and wherever I get to, I get to. Or else you end up getting like anxious about not finishing it or trying to rush through it, and then I guess that's where you make mistakes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good piece of advice. Another thing that I thought was genius was the computer fans on the Mist King nozzles. And that's something I had not come across before. So maybe you could talk us through that. That was, again, for the blue tree monitor enclosure, and how you did that, and how you came up with that idea, or maybe you saw someone else do it, and then how did you actually implement that?
So, yeah, I've done air circulation a few different ways, and I've always seen the importance of it, of not having stale air or anything like that. Right? I don't want air just to sit stagnant and not be able to circulate. Yeah, granted, you have vents and air will kind of come in and do its thing, but in the same breath, I wanted a little bit more, especially that I pretty much, well, every enclosure I have except for my, hatchling gargoyle geckos, it's all bioactive. So with that, I'm going to have the microfauna, but then even more so the plants. And I found plants with that airflow, they really take off. I've noticed it more so in the enclosures that I have fans than ones that I don't. I'm actually putting together a video right now. Once I working on this one, will be part of it, but 4 different ways I'm using fans. One of them I did in my paludarium. I made internal air ducts. I mean, just like you would have in a house. You have a vent going to your bedroom and the living room and the kitchen. I did the same thing for the paludarium, and 40 millimeter fans, all on different low, medium, and high settings. And they're on timers, so they don't run all day, or I can control it with a smart plug. But that really circulates, and I've noticed my paludarium just explode. I mean, I'm constantly cutting stuff back. I didn't want to do that in this enclosure here. One, the size of it, that would have been a whole air duct system. I would have had all different types of things going on in there. And I don't like eyesores when it comes to enclosures.
Mm-hmm.
Not that there's anything wrong with just putting vents on the top of an enclosure through the screen, but I didn't have that option with this because it's a solid roof. So I was
Right.
trying to think, how do I still get the fan without it being an eyesore, but also being able to control where the airflow would go? And I'm like, well, I did a little bit of research. I did find a YouTube video out there of somebody kind of doing something similar. I don't remember the name of it, but I was actually looking at like phone mounts with goosenecks and stuff. I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, I can do that. And then I had the Mist King, and I know that I point those wherever. So I just kind of came up with the idea, and also with what I saw on YouTube, and started taking apart a Mist King and snip some wires and put it together, and there we go.
So you basically ran the wires through obviously you pull the nozzle off the Mist King, and then you use the actual articulating arm to run the fan cord through, right? And that goes back up through the roof. So you're left with inside the enclosure, essentially a Mist King nozzle with the end, instead of being a spray nozzle, is just a small little computer fan.
Correct. Yeah.
And then you can move it wherever you want.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a 40 millimeter fan. And I found something. I made something really cheap out of PVC and it looked horrible. I was gluing things together and PVC cementing. Wasted a fan that way. I'm like, let me check Amazon, see if they have like a little case for these 40 millimeter fans. And they did. So what I did is I just got the case because I wanted something to be able to protect just in case the blue tree monitor got up to it. I didn't want him sticking his tongue or his finger in the fan while it was spinning. So the case, it was there. And then I just took a piece of window screen and put it between the fan and the case, sandwiched it together, and hot glued it to the Mist King that way, and it has worked perfect so far. So
is that how you fix the fan to the Mist King nozzle? Just hot glue?
Yeah.
Okay. Wow. And that's held perfectly fine.
It does, and it's one of those materials I forget about all the time because it's such a quick hold, and especially if you're doing something over it. So yeah, a lot of the stuff I do is trial and error with doing research first, making sure that it's animal safe. That's one thing I'm super I keen in on, because that obviously, you want to have an animal, you want to put anything in there that's toxic. So yeah, the hot glues, it's held perfectly fine.
And actually, speaking of the animal safety piece, there's something I wanted to mention that I don't want to forget. I see you after you've finished the backgrounds, you quite often rinse everything off with water. Is that part of that, just to get any paint or any weird fumes or anything off? Is that just a safety thing for you?
Yeah, I watched I'm sure you've heard of Usurper Design and Troy Goldberg. That's where I kind of started learning some drylok from. And they were talking about it in one of their videos or something. I had noticed it too. Plant growth really doesn't grow when it touches the site for quite some time. And they said, that they were washing down the enclosures, and the plant growth was, then the plants weren't dying off. So that's where I got that one from.
So there's clearly, some kind of residue that sticks there that, if it's not good for plants, it's probably not good for animals either. So better safe than sorry, just rinse it right off.
Yeah, and that's another point too. Let's bring that up. Yeah.
And then for the fogging system, which it was on, I think earlier, or maybe it's still on behind you, is the actual again, that's, you just have fog piped into the enclosure. That's pretty standard. But the actual ultrasonic fogger, is that a Reptile machine that you have there, or was that just a regular ultrasonic fogger that you would get for someone's bedroom that you've converted to have two outlets?
I know it's advertised as Reptile. It's kind of like the Leap Habitats one. I don't know if you've seen the one that they've come out with recently. It's pretty much the same thing, same setup, top fill. Cool mist is what you want when it comes to any kind of fogger. You don't want you don't want to add extra heat or anything like that to the enclosure. But yeah, it just fill it up with distilled water and then hook it up to the PVC, and that goes to a bulkhead. And it just comes right into the enclosure.
And so that device specifically is marketed towards reptile keepers, like it's specifically a reptile one? Or did you get that one off of Amazon or something? It just looks similar to the Leap one.
Yeah, I got it off Amazon. I forget. It might have been on a Facebook group that they were talking about it. And that's where I found it. Maybe I just searched, reptile foggers. I'm not exactly 100% sure.
Okay, yeah, because I'm always looking for a good, because, there's so many ultrasonic foggers that are quite often much cheaper than the ones that are reptile specific, but the ones that you get from Walmart and whatnot normally need so much modification that it becomes difficult. You just might as well go buy a reptile one that has a proper nozzle with a hose on it, because you're doing all, their output is normally, you can't modify it very easily, but the one that looked like you had has two outputs, so it looked pretty easy to just, pipe two areas of fog right into the enclosure.
Yeah, and that I used to do it the same way. It was just buy one from Walgreens or something, a coolness humidifier, and do it. And you're right. I mean, after the work you put into it, and managing fittings and everything, just buy one for $40 on Amazon.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's sometimes DIY is not the cheapest. After you've done all the work, just go buy one.
Yeah.
The other thing that I loved about the Blue Tree monitor, blue tree monitor. I don't know why I have trouble with that. It's just for some reason green tree is, I guess they're way more popular, so it's just like that's what keeps trying to come out, is the external hide box. And I feel like that is such a good, I see people doing this more and more now, and I think that's something that could be easily incorporated a lot more for more species than just monitors, lots of different species, because it gives them a large hide that doesn't take up space inside the enclosure. So you're sort of adding an entire room to your enclosure that you would be wasting inside the enclosure had you had the hide in there. So I thought that was a really cool idea. So can you walk us through how you put that together and sort of how the animal can get in and out of that hide without escaping?
Yeah, I mean, I knew that I wanted a nest box and or warm hide. I'm still not sure if it's male or female. Still a little too soon to tell. I think it may be male, but just in case if it was female, I didn't want her digging up the plants or anything like that. Trying to lay eggs. I also wanted to make sure that she wouldn't have had to second guess where she's going to lay if the temperatures weren't right. So I was laying in bed one night and I'm like, I got it. I'm going to drill a hole right through the enclosure and build an exterior nest box. I got the original idea of using the totes, the little yellow and black things you get from Home Depot, Tupperware containers, whatever you want to call them, just from Facebook groups and stuff like that. But not that there's anything wrong with it, but it'd be inside the enclosure, and it was like a big yellow top and a black bin, and with the direction I was going with this, I didn't want that in there.
Mm-hmm.
And I had already, built the trees out of, 6 different pieces of cork bark and, spray coated all them together. So I really didn't have room on the inside. So I figured, well, yep, the idea came. I'm going to drill a hole right through the enclosure. And that's what I did. And then it was just kind of piecing together what I needed to, one, make it safe so, the blue tree monitor could get in and out safely, and then also not taking up too much room behind the enclosure, so I can maximize the space in my reptile room for future builds. But yeah, after I drilled the hole, I just got I think it's a toilet bowl flange, PVC piece. Obviously it's brand new, so it wasn't used. Yeah. And then I just pretty much screwed that to the back of it, where the hole was. Before I did all that, I dry locked the inside. I actually added a little bit of spray foam in there just for some more surface area for the blue tree miner to grab onto for getting in and out. And I took 2 of the 7-gallon totes, one that could, just kind of, I could attach the heat pad to, so I can regulate temperature. And then the heat pad, it's hooked up to a thermostat. So then I take the other tote, put it on the inside, because I didn't want the direct heat to be touching the monitor while it was in there and possibly burn himself. Then I just filled it up with substrate and got it to the closest conditions I could with humidity and let it rip. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's really cool, and it would be if she does happen to be female with eggs and whatnot, it'd be very easy to, if she uses it, hopefully she does, if she's a female, to, open the back box and you collect the eggs out. You're not having to dig through things. You say you're not ruining the plants or anything, or having to, dig up all the soil. It's really clever. And then do you find that the heat mat actually does it, because those 7-gallon totes are quite large, and so you put a heat mat on the outside, and I guess the goal is to keep the soil warm in there, the substrate warm. Does it actually warm enough of the soil, or because I wasn't sure, because you have quite a lot of soil in there or substrate in there?
Yeah, it's a decent amount of soil for sure. I put it to the side so we can choose kind of where it wants to be, kind of find that perfect spot for him to lay. And my thermostat usually reads about 82 degrees.
Okay.
And that's at I put the thermostat about halfway down along with the heat mat itself. So, yeah. And that's actually where he generally chooses to sleep, is behind in that external hide.
Okay. So he does use it. That's really cool.
Oh yeah. Too much sometimes.
You're like, come back to the normal enclosure. We want to see you.
Yeah. One of the benefits with it too, though, is, I don't believe in putting hands on animals unless I have to. So if I needed to, I can always coax them into it by throwing, he loves the hornworm. So I throw a hornworm in there. He'll go down in, and I have a cap I can put on it. So now if I need to take him to the vet, or if I need to get in the enclosure and clean something that, if I got to pull the glass off or something, that way he's in that tote and I can pick it up, bring it to the vet, or do what I have to do inside the enclosure without any risk of him getting out or stressing him out.
Yeah, I'm a huge proponent of that just recently because I have a couple hides for my snakes that are completely removable. And I've found it is just so much easier because, when you're cleaning an enclosure, it's not always going to be the optimum time. I mean, if the snake is out and active, with the boas and whatnot, they're pretty slow moving. So I don't mind opening the door and letting them come out, and then they can move around the basement. That's fine while I clean their enclosure. I have no issue with that if they're awake and active. But if they're sleeping, it's a thing. You have to wake them up, and like you said, you're putting your hands on them when they don't necessarily want to be held, and you're kind of manhandling them. So it is just so much easier and less stressful for everybody if they are sleeping and they're in a hide that's removable. You just take the hide out, put the hide somewhere, and maybe I'll sometimes put those hides against a wall so the entrance to the hide is against the wall so they can't get out, because you turn your back and then you forget that they're out. But then you can clean the enclosure and it's simple, and then you put the hide back in with them right in there, and it's just. It is. I mean, it's what you would see a lot in the venomous world, as far as just safe practices, as far as not getting your hands too close to the mouth. But I think it's totally practical for animals that aren't bodily dangerous, just as far as reducing stress levels.
Yeah, couldn't agree more.
Yeah. So now you have this large enclosure behind you, and you're working on an incredible water system as well. So maybe we could talk a little bit about that, because the last video, you're just starting the pond. The pond is a pretty big, I'm not sure, how big is that pond?
Oh, geez. I mean, it's not huge, but it's not small. I think it's 36 inches long by 24 inches deep. And I mean, it holds 30 gallons of water. I think.
Yeah, that makes
I'm not
sense.
sure.
Yeah, so it's a pretty.
Yeah.
I mean, that's pretty big. It's a pretty big tub basically that you've actually lifted off the floor. So can you talk how that works? Like where the water's going? Is it filtering? I know you built basically a filter system as well. So I would love to hear about that. The one thing I didn't see in the video is the actual pumping system. Maybe that's going to be later, or maybe you mentioned it and I didn't pick up on it. So can you just talk us through how that system works?
Yeah, of course. So it's actually two different systems. The water tub that we were talking about is mainly going to be for, the reptile that's going in it to, one, use the bathroom.
Yeah.
They mainly go to the bathroom in water. And then two, also cool off or kind of just have
Swim.
that option.
Yeah.
Yeah. So with that being said, I know that I'm going to have to do water changes frequently. And I didn't want to have this tub in this enclosure being a huge eyesore, picking it up, trying to, wobble around with a whole bunch of water, or, using my 5-gallon shop vac that, I'll have to dump it and then fill it up again and that whole thing.
Well, I love because I've gone through this before. That process of planning things, and you run through all the different things that you'll have to do in that enclosure once it's done. So you can sit there and you can just imagine yourself. You're like, I've done that as well, where I'm like picturing myself carrying down like a vat of water. I'm like, no, that's not going to work. Like, there's no way I'm doing that. And you have to just run through every scenario possible. And it's it's almost a relief when you find something that's not going to work. You're like, no, a new idea has to come, because there's no way in hell that I'm shop vacuuming that out every time.
Yep, that, or you're sitting there stressing out, going, okay, what is the best way to execute this? And you just stare at it for an hour going, oh man, I haven't done anything.
Yeah.
And the worst possible outcome would have been, we just got new carpet down. Yeah, I got a walkout basement. So we just got new carpet put down. And wife, she's totally supportive of what I do. She loves reptiles herself, but I didn't want to be carrying this shop vac or this tub and then accidentally spill it all over the brand new carpet.
Exactly.
So well, I gotta kind of condense it down to this room. And that's where I kind of came up with the idea. Like my paludarium, I have it hooked up to my sump pump all through overflow. So that's kind of that is what I did with the bigger tub there. So it pretty much just drains. I have a shower head drain in the bottom, tightened together with the bulkhead. It comes out, and when I want the water to dump, I got a gate valve, which works, in my opinion, a lot better than one of those ball shutoff valves. They're much easier to work and release the water and release to open up the valve. So then it goes through that, and then it comes down into I think it's a 15-gallon tote, or a 30-gallon tote. And from there, it goes through a straining process. So I'm able to put the lid on. The PVC pipe just connects right to it. I have a couple of PVC unions, so I can use it as a quick release. So it's easy just to detach and attach for if I have to move the enclosure or remove the actual tote from the outside of the enclosure. And yeah, it goes through a straining process, pretty much just through your kitchen strainer that you would find on Amazon or at Kohl's or whatever, kitchen supply stores around you. And that way it's going to pretty much just clean everything out. Main reason is I didn't want to have a whole bunch of waste going into my sump pump.
Right.
Because I didn't want to clog it or even have any kind of extra smell. I still wanted to be able to clean out the waste if I needed to. So yeah, it just works its way through the different chambers, funneling itself out, and then it just goes right to my sump pump. And then from there, it shoots right out of the house.
So I guess you will still have, liquid like urates and whatnot that are just actual water will pass through the whole system, but the strainer stops any solids from making its way right into your sump pump.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, that is really clever. Yeah. And so you said it's actually two systems. So that's the system that you use to flush the water out. So there'll be no circulation then. You'll just fill it, and then it basically is emptying when you need to clean it.
Yeah, I'll fill it with just with a garden hose hooked up to my bathroom that's down here in the basement. But I do have, which I haven't shown yet in the video. That's what's coming next. I drilled. So you can't see it just from if you're looking from the outside of the enclosure looking in, but there's actually another PVC pipe coming in that I'm going to have all connected running to the back of the enclosure. That'll have it'll have a filter and also a heater connected to it just to get the temperatures right where I want it.
Okay, that's cool. That's really cool. And then the second thing is the drip wall, and that's a separate total system, I guess.
Yeah. Originally, I wanted to put it kind of right on top of the system we were just talking about.
So it
just
would
I didn't
drip
have
into the pond.
Yeah. Well, actually, it would have still operated the same way that it does now, going into the cereal pretty much container is what it is. But it would have pushed everything out too far, and I would have taken away space from the reptile. I want to maximize as much as I can.
Gotcha.
So I was trying to think, where can I put it? Because that would have brought everything about another foot this way. So yeah, it's just sitting right here. And the way that it works is I drilled a hole in the background, and I have a PVC, just pretty much a pipe that this is the top of the drip wall. And I just drilled some holes in it. So it just kind of drips down. It goes down the wall here, and it goes into a cereal container,
like a plastic cereal container. Yeah.
And that was one of those things like we were talking about earlier, just thinking about ways to make something work, or this is going to work but this isn't. I wanted it to be deep, right? But I didn't want it to be wide because I didn't want it to come all the way out. There's no point for it to come all the way out.
Yeah.
So I wanted to be close to the background. So I figured, well, let's go to a couple of stores and see what I can find, and found that, and pretty much just put a bulkhead on the bottom, drilled right through the enclosure and the foam board, and hooked that up to a bulkhead, and that goes down into a 5-gallon bucket, and then in the 5-gallon bucket I have a pump that just shoots right back up to the top.
So is the pump just one of those standard pond pumps basically that you get off Amazon?
Yeah, I forget the name of it, but it was like $25. I originally had a ZooMed canister filter, the turtle canister filter hooked up to it, and it was making it to the top, but it just the flow wasn't great. It wasn't doing what I wanted it to. So I actually got a cheaper pump, and it works a lot better.
Yeah, I bought some of. I have a similar pump that I bought off Amazon that was cheap. So I was like, oh, this is great, and it was actually way more powerful than I was expecting it to be. It was too powerful for what I needed it for, but I thought because it was cheap, it was going to be kind of a lower flow situation. But that thing can push water like crazy. So it's amazing what you can get off Amazon. So as far as so the reservoir was the cereal container that's holding the catch, basically, catching all the drips. Will the animal have access to that, or will you be able to seal that off in a way that, or do you care if the animal has access to it?
Yeah, I don't want access to it, but I did want it to bump humidity. I'll
Okay.
probably put a humidity gauge in there to have some running water, and it just looks cool in my opinion.
Yeah.
I love water features. I think that it just adds so much more to the aesthetics of an enclosure. But yeah, my plan is I have two options. Once again, going back to the drawing board. Um, I'm either going to cut a piece of PVC board and put it like 3 or 4 inches down and put rocks on top of that, or I'm just going to fill the whole thing with Leica and then put rocks on top of that.
That
And
makes
so
sense.
it'll be flush and it'll just kind of, drip into nothing is the goal that I'm going for.
Yeah. And then, like you said, the water features do look cool, although many people who do them are like, I'm never going to do a water feature again because it's just such a pain in the ass. What was the thought behind it? Like, because you just aesthetically you thought it looked good, or is there some kind of more function? Obviously, there's some humidity as well, but did you see somebody with a drip wall and you're like, I want to replicate that?
Not necessarily like this kind of style here. I've known about drip walls. You go to the zoo, especially, you see them. Um, and yeah, I just kind of wanted to be able to add something like that in there. I remember, I'm trying to think I saw, it might have been a video by Serpa Design at one point that did a drip wall that kind of got my mind rolling with using the PVC to kind of help spread it apart.
Yeah.
And then the bottom portion of it is okay, well, I'm not going to have it going into an aquarium. How do I get this water back up to the top without making a huge mess down below? And then that's when I came up with just getting a little small cereal container and cycling it that way.
Yeah, that's cool. I mean, they do look amazing, and Troy Goldberg has done some incredible water features, and one of my favorites was just his basically a rain enclosure. He just made this enclosure, instead of it misting, it just rains drops, and I thought that was just so cool. So it does add like a really unique, powerful feature. And anybody, even if you're not a reptile person, you can look at an enclosure. If you see some sort of waterfall or water feature, it's going to draw people's attention. Is that where you're using? You had mentioned earlier that you were starting to work with like Zoopoxy. Is that what you're using it for?
Yeah, so it's called PolyGem Zoopoxy. This build here with what's going in it now, it would tear through drylok real quick. Just
Okay.
drylok on a foam background. So I needed something that was going to be able to hold up pretty much to Godzilla himself.
So there's no drylok on that background. That's all the epoxy.
Correct. Yeah. It's and that's just the color it comes. Now I'm still going to paint it. I'm either going to use an acrylic paint or use drylok over it. And I know I said I'm not going to use drylok, but as a hard shell, right?
Right. Yes. Yeah. Once you have it sealed, you can still use the drylok for detail.
Yeah. And I was thinking about using cement, but that would have made this thing weigh so much.
Yeah.
This Zoopoxy stuff, I mean, this board right here, it's you can knock somebody out with that, and it's light as a feather. It's super cool.
And where did you get it?
It's a company called PolyGem, sorry, Zoopoxy. I can send you their contact info.
Sure.
It's a game changer, man. It really is. Working with this stuff, I don't think I'm going to go back to using drylok for any kind of monitor species after working with this stuff, just because of, the strength that it has. And I mean, and you can mold it, right? Like, I always thought epoxy was a liquid form. This stuff, it's pretty much like having mud balls, that you would clump together.
Really?
And it's almost like a clay piece.
Interesting. So do you apply it with your hands? You're not applying it with a brush?
Yep.
So you're pushing it into the walls and letting it harden.
Yeah.
And just one coat, or?
Yeah, you got to have it about a 1/4 inch thick. I could probably get done I don't know, 2 foot by 2 foot section in about 2 hours.
Oh, okay. So
it takes time.
Yeah.
And but that's also me just taking my time too. Like I try to perfect.
You want it done well.
Yeah.
Is it pretty expensive then?
It can be, yeah. Yeah, my friends over at PolyGem, I've been talking with them a lot lately, and they've been able to give me a slight deal, but mainly also to going to be putting it on my YouTube channel and whatnot. It's not sponsored or anything like that, but
Yeah.
uh, yeah, price point you're probably looking at about $650 for 10 gallons.
Okay. So and
And
10
this one will
gallons.
probably,
Yeah. How much will you have to use for that enclosure?
probably about 16, 17.
Okay. Yeah. So that's definitely going to cost quite a lot, but it'll be worth it.
Yeah. And now, granted, you could also buy, 1 gallon, 2 gallons if you're just doing a small, crested gecko enclosure or something. And you could probably knock out 2 or 3, crested gecko enclosures with the uh, 2 gallon, amount.
Yeah, exactly. You are doing an 8-foot wall with 5 feet. It's a big space. Like, that is basically a zoo size exhibit. And I assume it has zoo in the name. So this is material that zoos are using, I'm sure, and it's animal safe.
Yeah. 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 I've talked with them a little bit, and they do use it, whether it's repair jobs at zoos, and it actually cures and strengthens underwater. So if you have something underwater, you can go ahead and actually work with it, mold it underwater, and it'll go ahead and harden up in pretty much, I believe, the same amount of time as it would, just on dry surface.
Cool. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
really interesting. So that will be a definite game changer, like you said, especially if it's. There's nothing worse than the drylok painting, like you said. So even if you have to spend a little bit of extra, it's actually okay. One thing that I really appreciate about your videos too is you, whether this is intentional or not, you do a good job showing, some of the safety aspects of working with some of these chemicals and whatnot. Like you're wearing a mask if you're doing, creating dust and whatnot, but even a respirator when you're working with some of the chemicals and whatnot. Is there a rule of thumb that you have as far as, using, like, are you using a respirator for everything, or just when there's, something that's giving off a smell, like a noticeable smell?
Yeah. Mainly, I don't want to get sued.
Smart.
But no, you can definitely smell when you're using a hot foam cutter, hot foam knife, people call it, cutting the XPS board. Yeah, that stuff will come up, and you don't want to breathe that in. It's just not conducive to your lungs. Same with using other materials. One, safety. Two, I don't want to have any health concerns or health issues from working on this stuff.
Yeah. The other day I was doing like soldering iron into plastic, and I was thinking, this is pretty strong. I'm not sure if I should just be breathing this in. So I'm just like, I just hold my breath while I was doing it and just, left the room to breathe, because I'm like, I just don't think that's good to be breathing in.
Yeah. Yeah. That, and also with using like the wire brush on the XPS board. That stuff is microscopic when it comes off. You're breathing that stuff in. That XPS, it's foam. It's not going to break down inside your lungs. It'll just be in there, and good luck getting that out,
Yeah, that's such a good point. When you, especially the amount of mess that creates when you're using that wire brush on that foam, it just throws that stuff into the air. And like you said, the big pieces that get stuck to you with static are the pieces that you don't have to worry about. It's the tiny little dust fibers that you're basically creating that if you're not wearing a mask, you're breathing it in. And that's what I don't often see. And it could be because, people are filming from a different perspective. Maybe you don't see their face, but you don't often see people with the proper protective gear. So I really appreciated that. That was just good to remind folks that, yeah, if you are doing stuff DIY, you want to make sure you're careful.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's important. I lived a crazy destructive life in my past. So, whatever, I've done already enough damage to my lungs, but if there's some kid watching it, man, I don't want him to get hurt or anything of that nature by watching one of my videos. I'd feel terrible about that. So, especially if it had something to do with his breathing or whatnot.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, if you've lived a little bit of a harder life, you don't want to do the damage to your lungs building a lizard house. It's like, damn. So yeah, that's good. As far as future projects, because I'm not sure if you have any ideas or other things that you want to tackle, like. Again, I encourage everybody to go check out your videos, look at how well everything puts together. Like everything just looks aesthetic. Like you have, framing around the lights, and it just, nothing looks like a classic DIY where there's like, exposed wood, or everything looks clean and sharp and it's all really well done, and you're doing, especially with the pond and the drip wall and all these different little things that I think are just so fascinating. Is there any other thing in the back of your head that you think, okay, one day I'm going to tackle that? Like, I don't know what it would be, but some sort of project?
Yeah, no, and first and foremost, man, thanks for the recognition and appreciating my work. I do put, obviously you can see a lot of work into it. And those 10, 15-minute videos sometimes could be a month, 2 month, 3 month project, trying to condense it down to somebody would actually click on it,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, that's the challenge.
Yeah. I mean, so for me, every project that I've done, um, I've always tried to add something extra to it, kind of a special feature on top of the other features. What's coming next after this one? I don't know. My mind hasn't gone there yet.
Yeah,
Usually it's with the reptile or amphibian that I get, and I'll kind of, look at some pictures online from their natural habitat and just kind of see some things that I really like, and then just try and see how I can incorporate my imagination into their habitat of their natural range and kind of bring it together. So I don't know what my next builds look like. I do know that I have a few coming up, that I'm going to be working on. I have my whole room already planned out, along with the room outside, of this room. I know that I want to do like another paludarium, more of a simple paludarium, because I got two of them on my channel. The last one I did, I mean, I threw everything in the kitchen sink at this thing. And I don't want to intimidate people into building, right? So I
yeah,
want to just really kind of bring it down to an entry level polydarium style. So we're like, okay, let me try this one here first. Understand the workings of how water's going to flow. Let me understand where, I'd want to put the water feature and be able to separate land from water and maximize both spaces of both of the water and the land, before maybe digging into something like my last polydarium video. So I think that's going to be one of my next enclosure builds. I also want to do a fighting betta aquarium for my mom. She's always had fighting bettas, so I want to kind of enrich the life of her fish there. So just kind of build
cool.
a cool enclosure for them there. I'm thinking about doing like a live stream on the YouTube channel, to where I can answer a lot of questions that people have, because my inbox on Instagram, gets flooded. And I'll try and answer any way that I can, but staying in my lane too. People
Hmm.
ask me about, when do I pair these chameleons together? Look, I don't have experience with that. I don't know.
Yeah, I'll tell you. Yeah,
Reach out to Mighty Morphin Reptiles or something, and kind of go that route. But yeah, then even on my YouTube channel, like, I've answered every single comment, because one, I care about what I do. Two, I care about giving the right information out. And three, it really comes down to, the reptile or the amphibian having their lives enriched.
yeah, I think that's really well said, and I think a live stream would be such an appropriate thing, because the construction and DIY, it's so confusing, especially if you're somebody that's not done a lot of it. You walk into Home Depot and you have no clue what you're doing. You don't know what products to buy, you don't know how to use them, and you don't know what tools you need. I mean, that the biggest thing is having appropriate tools. I mean, I did a lot of DIYing back in the day when I had barely any tools, and it's just so much more difficult. So it's always good to invest in a couple of good tools. But I think of those, like, I don't know if they still do these on the radio anymore, but when I was a kid, I remember like the Sunday morning construction home renovation show that my dad would always be listening to, because you would hear, and people would call in like, can I use this caulk for this thing? And so I can imagine that your inbox is full, because people have so many questions about how to do these things, and I think that would be a great avenue to go. And do you have any animals on your want list that you're willing to share? That, I mean, obviously you don't have to talk about the one that's behind you, because we can leave that one for the big reveal on the channel. But if you have the whole room planned out, I'm sure there's a few different directions you want to head species wise.
Yeah, I'd really like to get some emerald tree skinks. Clint's Reptiles, he had me hooked just by watching them.
Yeah, yeah.
He's got one of his videos working with them. I think they would be pretty cool. Just the interaction you would get. I believe I'm saying it right. Chinosaurus, the
Mm-hmm.
um, I don't know what their
It's it's a crocodile.
layman name is. Crocodile.
Crocodile
Yeah.
lizard, yeah. For some
Yeah.
reason, I think there's another word in there. But as you were saying the paludarium, I was in my head. I was thinking Shinosaurus. So I'm not sure if that's what you were thinking as well for paludarium. But obviously, they're a pretty aquatic species.
Yeah, yeah. If I could get my hands on them, that's exactly where it'll be going. I'm actually working with a guy now, and he has a few, and he's wanting some enclosures built, so I might be able to work something out there. An earless monitor would be neat. Now, the animals I want to care for are rare. You know,
Yeah, yeah.
I enjoy that aspect of it too. I'm not looking to get a whole rack system with 100 animals on one rack. I want to be able to hone in and work with the animals that I have and enjoy the uniqueness of them.
Yeah, those earless, the Borneo earless monitors are really fascinating, and another really cool aquatic type species. I have a friend in the Netherlands who keeps them, and actually was able to successfully breed them as well. And it's a really cool species to keep, and it gives you tons of potential as far as enclosure goes.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that's really cool. And one thing I want before we wrap up, I want to reiterate something that you had said early on that I want to make sure people pick up on is the concept of the keeping the animal at first in a smaller grow out enclosure and watching their behaviors. I think that's so key because I think one thing I talk about on the channel a lot is offering larger space, giving animals big enclosures, which I completely agree with. And I have no issue with people putting younger animals in large spaces either. That's, classic myth in the hobby is if you put a baby in an enclosure, it's going to get lost and die. I don't think that's true. But I also think it is true that you need to watch the behavior of the animal and understand how it's going to use the enclosure, how it interacts with things, what types of things, what does it do in the morning, how does it act in the afternoon, where does it sleep, so that when you do a huge project and you set up the enclosure, you're not wasting time and space doing things incorrectly. You're actually setting it up in the way that this gecko is going to go here, or this lizard or snake is going to bask here because I see him do it on this micro scale. And I think that's just such a key point to make.
Yeah, thanks. And I can't agree with you 100%. And with what you said about putting an animal into a large enclosure when it's a baby, I mean, is it going to die? No, I've done that, but I really like the availability or the ability to uh, more or less study the thing, understand its habits.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Brad, I really appreciate this conversation. Is there anything that you wanted to say before we wrap up? I think we pretty much hit all the points that I wanted to get to, but if there's any last words, it's okay if you don't have any, but if you do have anything, now you can go ahead.
Yeah, if you guys are watching this podcast, go ahead and like and subscribe to my man Dylan here, Animals at Home.
Thank you.
Yeah. No, I've watched a lot of your videos over the last month or so once we started talking, and you got a lot of informative, educational, a lot of great guests that come on that really know what they're talking about. So, if somebody's looking to learn something, I'm sure you have a video about it. And then also the work that you do with the Amazon Rainforest Conservatory, keep that up too, man. I think that speaks volumes about your character and what you're trying to do for the hobby, and also outside of the hobby. Trying to get more people involved with understanding rainforests and trying to help out there. So thanks for doing all that. And definitely go ahead and check out some of my, if you're watching this, check out some of my YouTube videos if you're looking for a DIY of some sort. I sometimes the videos may start up just a little slow because I kind of got to get through that first minute or two of the basics, but then it really takes off with a lot of different ideas. But I want to make sure I'm all encompassing for everybody that may never have seen how to do a DIY. What does the foam background look like? What does all this do? So I'll kind of get through that and then just really start the show using your imagination. You can really take building a reptile enclosure and making it as naturalistic as possible to the next level. And it doesn't always start out looking like that. I'm sure Dylan, when you first start, it looks like, what is this thing even gonna be?
Yeah.
And then when you start adding the detail to it, that's when it really starts to come to life. So don't give up before your vision's complete.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what I find about your videos. They're so entertaining. I watch a lot of weird videos of people like restoring rusty implements. People find stuff in their garden and then I love, it's just like so satisfying for me to watch people redo things and fix things. And that was the vibe that I got with your videos. And I'll say, like, there's a difference between being a very good craftsman about building these things and being somebody who can actually put together a good video tutorial, because those skills are actually not related at all. And there's a big learning curve with editing and holding attention and making sure the shots can actually show what you're doing, because that's difficult too, because half the time the camera is where you need to be in order to do the thing that you're trying to do. So it is doing tutorials video-wise can be a real pain. So you've really nailed it. And like I said, your channel will continue to grow because it's right in there with Tanner Serpa and Troy Goldberg, like that sort of style. And I was just eating breakfast the other day watching your videos because it was like soothing. So even if you're someone that's not wanting to tackle DIY, I 100% recommend watching Brad's videos, because it'll give you ideas for how to implement, misting systems, fogging systems, ventilation. All that stuff is really important regardless if you're building your own enclosures. Can you tell everybody where they can find the name of the channel and as well as the Instagram?
Yeah, of course. Brad's BioActive Builds on YouTube and Brad's BioActive Builds on Instagram. So same name. Just go ahead, search it. Hopefully it pops right up, and make sure you follow or subscribe for upcoming content.
Awesome. Well, Brad, this was an absolute pleasure chatting with you. Like I said, it's a pleasure watching your videos as well, and I cannot wait to see the channel evolve and the projects continue on, and it's going to be a huge value to the hobby. So thank you very much.
Thanks, man. Much appreciated, and wishing you the best of luck.
All right, that is the end of that episode. Brad, thank you so much for jumping on the podcast as well and just doing the videos that you're doing. And what he told me off air afterwards is that he edits all his videos on his phone, which is incredible. I mean, I know there's actually a lot of people that do that. A lot of people film with their phones because the smartphone cameras are actually so good. I did that for a really long time, up until maybe only a year ago. But editing on your phone really takes a lot of patience. I don't like doing anything on my phone, typing emails or anything, because I just find it so frustrating. So the fact that he's doing all those incredible videos on his phone is really amazing. So I want everybody to go check out his videos. They're so well done. I can't wait to watch his projects evolve, and especially because the last project that he's done, that 8-foot enclosure, is just part 1. So there's going to be so many more parts that are going to build onto that. It's going to be a really interesting series to watch. So I encourage everybody to go check that out. In the show notes, you'll find links to his channel and his Instagram page. That's at animalsathome.network.com. Just click on the Animals at Home podcast header and you will find all the episodes there. Thank you so much to Custom Reptile Habitats for sponsoring this episode of the podcast. If you would like to join us on Patreon, you can do that at patreon.com/animalsathome. Of course, that helps support the podcast and keep the lights on in here. Although, if you're watching on YouTube, you'll see that I'm recording recording this outro with the lights off, which is incredibly rare. But I just wrapped up the podcast with Brad. We literally just stopped talking maybe 20 minutes ago, and I thought I'm just going to record the intro outro now because I don't want to forget anything that I wanted to say. So anyway, I want everybody to go check out his channel. It's incredible. Go follow him on Instagram as well, and I will see everybody in the next episode.